This film is one of the early sessions of the Decca project to record all the Haydn symphonies with the Academy of Ancient Music in the style and with the size forces that Haydn himself would have known. From the documentation in Esterházy, it's quite easy to piece together the size of ensemble that Haydn worked with. And most of his symphonies, 75% of them, were written for this very small and domestic band. We're using an orchestra of 4 first violins, 4 seconds, 1 viola, 1 cello, 1 double bass, and very simple woodwinds. The flute is featured as a sort of guest soloist in some of the slow movements. And that was typical of what Haydn would have used for the first 50 or even 60 symphonies that he wrote. We begin with a patch from the 1760s. They are sort of everyday symphonies, some with nicknames, some without. The whole project, though, is going to last, I would say, a minimum of 8 years and possibly 10 years, and that is at the rate of recording more than 10 symphonies a year. So it's a huge undertaking.
So the best I can do for you, like nothing.
When you do Beethoven, you know you only have 9 symphonies, and if you're wise, you avoid any suspicion of a 10th. If you're Mozart bound, then you know you have 41 named symphonies, and when we came to that project, they grew to 60 because these involved other pieces that Mozart at one time or another considered to be symphonies. Haydn's 104, which actually grows to be 106 with 2 extra unnumbered symphonies, is much more of a challenge, and people rightly say, why do 104? Wouldn't 50 be enough? Well, it would mean missing out over 50 masterpieces if you limited yourself this way. One of the problem areas for this particular small orchestra, of course, is that you have on the bass line 1 cello, 1 bass, 1 bassoon. They all get to play solos at one point or another in the early symphonies. They're always concertante moments for them, and it's known that the bass solos particularly lie very awkwardly on a normal symphonic bass nowadays. What we discover is that Haydn's bass was tuned differently. It was the typical Viennese patterning of tuning the string so they make basically a chord of D major. That is, one string will be tuned to F sharp. So therefore, any melody that lies basically on the scale of D major will lie extremely well.
We tend to use metal strings on the modern instruments now, and these are gut strings. The bottom 2 are wound with wire, but the tension is much lower, and so the neck is not quite at the same angle as a modern instrument. So the whole thing tends to resonate a lot more, just because of the lack of tension here. And accordingly, you tend to bow a bit differently to allow the instrument to speak rather than to just make the bow do all the work. You know, I tend to like. You can hear the instrument resonating. In fact.
Certain factors are fixed for you by the means you choose. The choice of original instruments is not because one wants to be archaic and deal in an antique world, but because one wants to increase the power of communication of Haydn's own instructions. If you think he got it right, the chances are he got it right for the instrument he was indicating, not for some other instrument. Expert advice comes from only a few quarters. There's really a limited pool of Haydn scholars. The prime one, I think, that without whom none of this would happen is Robbins Landon, who has done most of the documentation over the last 30 years and provided one with texts, material for the orchestra, and endless supply of facts, theories, and enthusiasm, which I think keeps any Haydn work afloat just on this bed of informed enthusiasm. We lived in the palace, which was very nice, and we had, I would say, the enormous bonus of Robbins Landon with us, who becomes, in the loveliest way, proprietorial about, look at this, look at that, and come and have a look at this. And I've just discovered the Chinese temple, and I know where the chapel is. And it's a sense of constant wonderment and enthusiasm about the place. That builds it. You really felt you were there with a personality.
To play on.
But this is where Haydn's orchestra would have sat, the
Where
original
Haydn's orchestra
16.
would have sat. And 16 or even later got to be more, including sometimes clarinets. But they didn't apparently like the clarinets, so they sent them away after 2.5 years. And then they had trumpets, very expensive trumpets, with very expensive instruments from Nuremberg, and they sent them away after 2 years too. But on the whole, at the end, it ended up with 21.
You could always buy in players, I guess, if you wanted
Yes.
a really festive occasion. You could borrow your trumpets.
Exactly,
or
that's what they
from
did
somebody
too.
else.
And they were always borrowing trumpets and symphony for festive occasions, sending them in by carriage. And so the orchestra was here, and whatever audience there was, which meant the prince, his consort, his relatives,
guests,
the guests, and officials of the palace. And if it got too numerous, they could go back here, open these 3 doors, and put the overflow in there, which was much better heated than here. Really must say I've never heard the symphonies more beautifully and played, and also it seems to me that all their civilized quality came out in a way that I have never heard before. So
It's a very civil.
complimenti.
The surroundings, I think, are civilized, and
Yes.
for all of us, it's the beginning of quite a long voyage of exploration.
Yes,
It's
indeed.
really nice to set sail in the correct ambience.